Yeah. So back. Yeah. So this presentation concerns an integrated vision about the role of cities. Well, in fact, it's not concerning a vision for the city, but a vision on our understanding of cities. Thank you. Our understanding of cities, our reading of the city, the question is there any approach, any issue that we missed in the previous, well, in this, I can hold. Oh, okay.
I will do this whole face, this one.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's no problem. Is there something missing? Is there a bias in our way, or let's say the mainstream way of reading the role of cities? And of course, this is an important reflection, in my opinion, because as yesterday it was said, in particular by Arthur Gemis, we need a roadmap. We need some direction through the new utilization of the wealth of data that we dispose of. So, and he said, the suggestion is take a reliable theory or piece of theory and test it. So start from theory, start from what the general scientific analysis tells. So this will be exactly the structure of my presentation, and in particular I see here a new challenge, enlarging the interpretive paradigm that we use for intending the city. By this, I refer mainly to the present and mainstream functional geographical approach to the city. And the idea is we have absolutely to enlarge to at least two big, let's call it approaches or methodologies. What I call the cognitive relational approach and the hierarchical distributive approach. So, of course, cities experienced a change of paradigm in the last decades, the transition to what is called, and I call, the cognitive cultural society. So cities were at the forefront of change, and they became, this is in the paper circulated by Karima and Peter, not just the dominant settlement pattern in our planet, but turned into important power blocks. The term power means much to me when I was mentioning a distributional approach, of course. Power is there. Are we really structured for the interpretation of the power of cities? My answer is no. We left this since many years. You know, in the 70s, this one was one of the issues, but then we forgot. What is really the role and the outcome of this role of the cities? Cities are cognitive systems in a globalized world. And cognition, of course, is something very important, is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through a long list of processes, but in particular judgment, evaluation, computation, production of concepts, production of codes and languages. This is the role that the city, and in particular the large cities nowadays, are really carrying out. We know that we owe to the city the culture, even the democracy concept. So there's something important to be taken into consideration. So we need a parallel shift in the paradigm that we use for understanding cities beyond the traditional functional approach, which is typical of mainstream spatial economics and in particular of geography, speaking about smart cities, economic efficiency, agglomeration economies, location, accessibility, all these, of course, very important issues. But this is not all. And first of all, the city is not just an agglomeration. So we need at least two other approaches, what I call the relational cognitive approach, acknowledging the specific and non-mediated role of the city as a collective learning machine or device, enhancer of creativity and knowledge, producer of knowledge, codes, and symbols, and the hierarchical distributive approach, addressing themes such as territorial power and control. So how to measure it? Of course, it's an intriguing question, but the outcomes, of course, are visible in terms of spatial, income distribution in space. And this is one of the paths that we have to follow if we want to understand really the role of cities. So the cognitive relational approach is being used more and more in present decades, but not the second one. So the functional geographic approach, well, I go fast here. Scott and Storper said very well, one of the central features of urbanization has always been its efficiency generating qualities via agglomeration. Cities have always functioned as nodes, are places, are agglomeration, but also nodes in a system of long-distance trade. And of course, there's a plethora of analysis going in depth on why agglomeration works, what's in agglomeration that pushes towards this increased efficiency. So, of course, face-to-face contacts, knowledge contacts, also this idea of that face-to-face allows inclusion of visual and body language, acquisition of shared values, you know, in that paper by Storper and Venables 2003, which ends up with easier interpretation of information and higher efficiency of transactions. But I say we stop too early. We stop to the static vision of the efficiency of the city, but not the dynamics. The link between contacts, information, knowledge, innovation is not explained. So we have to go beyond this. And we arrive to the second approach, the cognitive relational. There's sufficient agreement nowadays that if growth is intended as not just enlarging the size of the cities or the regions, but is intended as structural change and innovation, there is sufficient agreement that the city should be analyzed as a milieu. The term milieu was used in early, late 19th century by Durkheim. We use it, of course, also in regional science. My definition some years ago is the milieu is a system of factors and activities characterized by the sharing of behavioral and cognitive codes sharing of values, representations, and sense of belonging. And the outcome is that pure contacts become social relationship and potential synergies. Static agglomeration externalities become dynamic ones, generating reduction of dynamic uncertainty. This is the role, the dynamic role of space, and local space in particular, in my opinion. Reduction of dynamic uncertainty, which is crucial for any innovation process, and processes of collective learning. The role of the city becomes generative of knowledge, of creativity, and the approach becomes cognitive relational. As somebody said, an evolutionary regional economics. So, in the words of Jean-Remy, the urban milieu becomes a specific production unit generating along original processes some products in which the city maintains a monopoly power. And monopoly power in economics means something, means pricing, means a price which is not a competitive pricing. And this product is knowledge. And let's go to the third approach, the hierarchical distributive. The city as territorial control. The early idea of this was back in Marx and Engels' the German ideology. The greatest division of material and mental labor is the separation of town and country. This antagonism begins with the transition from barbarism to civilization and is dramatically and strongly present nowadays. Fernand Braudel spoke extensively about this in all his works. The cities were born from the most ancient and most revolutionary division of labor, countryside and agriculture on one side, and the so-called urban activities on the other. Nowadays, of course, it's not only this, but of course, with the migration of industry and manufacturing in particular outside the big cities, is between advanced services on one side and industry and the rest outside. Roncayolo, another historian, French historian, says the city presents itself in different degrees as the place from which a territorial control is established. Have we really studied this element of territorial control? I think that this is really a missed opportunity. In particular, Adam Smith still observing the city, said that we are in presence not just of a functional division of labor, but also, it's not his words, but a hierarchical and unbalanced division of labor. Why? Because in the exchange between the products of the city and the products of the countryside, there is a jump, there is a huge divide. Why? Because in the countryside, the products are competitive, and the pricing is a competitive pricing, while in the city, all the corporations which exist still now, which provide an insufficient supply of services, of course, generate monopolistic pricing of the product of the city. So you exchange between a monopoly and a world of competition with, of course, a big gain for the city. So these ideas come from very far. So, well, this is just a synthesis of what I said before. If we understand the city through a spatial logic, we separate the territorial dimension and the network dimension, of course, but on the rows we have the hermeneutic logic, so the interpretation logics, and here I separate the functional geographic, the relational cognitive, and the distributive dimension, but I will, I have to skip this. So, how can we go in depth inside this third approach, in particular the hierarchical distributive, through three dimensions. The first is the dimension of personal income distribution, rich and poor, inside the city. Second, the functional income distribution between the big classes of incomes, which are, of course, wages, profits, and rents. And third, the spatial income distribution between city and countryside, or large cities and small cities. So, on the first dimension, personal income distribution, there's early evidence in urban development that we see already a new divide between, in social terms, which are also spatial terms, a new polarization between a class of workers endowed with intellectual and creative skills, operating on symbols and codes, and a class of low wages, manual and service workers. Some early works by Alan Scott, but also a recent book by Richard Florida on the crisis of the city is present. And Philippe Aguillon also recently found in America that the areas where you have more of new creative destruction, Schumpeterian creative destruction, are also the places and the cities where the divide and the imbalance in incomes and wealth is the highest. Functional income distribution. So, what about the urban land rent? We forgot about it? No, we should not forget it, because apparently the recent urban renaissance and the relaunch of cities that happened at least since the mid-80s, of course, will and is in fact feeding land rents. A huge part of local development profits are sucked out from the pockets of entrepreneurs, but also workers and their salaries, and go into the pockets of landowners at the expense of profits. And some new analysis like this one, reconstructing the price of houses, residential buildings, since 1890, or if I remember well, to now, was published in the American Economic Review quite recently, showing something very important. A boom of the residential housing market started after the mid of 1980s. Exactly, on time with the development of globalization, but also financialization of the real estate market. Which means globalization, but with some specificities, of course. And which are the results? Well, taking the most recent period, 2010, real house prices rose by a factor of 3.3, while construction costs by a factor of 1.5. So half of that, and land prices inside the sector by a factor of 7.5. And land prices are the true capitalization of land rent. So this share is rapidly increasing. 81% of the 2012 increase in real house prices was represented by an increase in land prices. So directly in the pocket of landowners. And here are the graphs. Hope I have. Yes, here you see taking, 1980 to 2012 here. So here we have the last 30 years, the trend in construction cost, and the trend, of course, in house prices, which increased fastly and more fastly since at least 1990. The share of land in total housing value, which is something very important, of course, it's, you see, from 33% to 90%. Interestingly enough, in two countries where there is the maximum of regulation, but also taxation of land rents, thank you, Germany and the US, where the competitive climate is the highest, have the lowest increase, the lowest share, while all the other countries show really a huge share in the value of the physical city going into land rents. The same analysis was done recently by the Bank of Italy, the study the research offices, with the same methodology, and found exactly the same result. Construction costs 1950-2012 rose by 1.7 times. House prices 2.7 in real terms. These are not, there's not inflation here. And land prices 3.9. And the share of land or real prices, 2012, I made some calculations. Turns out to be 58%. Most interestingly, in Italy, there are indications for that in the difference between large cities and small and medium cities. And here you see in major cities, the house of residential houses went up, from the 4.9 times in the major cities, and in Italy overall 2.9 times. So this is an affair really driven by large cities. So, and similar results were achieved recently by Henry de Groot and others in a book on the land premium, the urban land premium. In Amsterdam city center, price of land is 200 times as high as in the countryside of East Groningen. Groningen. And this difference more than doubled between 85 and 2007. So this is something happening. We should study it. Why? Why this happens, and how, and with which consequences? Total land rents, so the rental prices, that constitute stricto sensu the land rent, account for between 3% and 4% of GDP. Only the delta of cities with respect to the marginal city. And I say this is not all the story, because land rent, a part of land rent, is what I call the transformation rent, which comes up in the transformation of the city, in the change from an agricultural land use to urban land use, or from an abandoned industrial site to service offices, etc., etc. And you know, this is not just a rate, is the capital gain that is achieved, and this is much higher and terribly important in distributional sense. And this idea of the city as a business reminds me about something that you know here in this place very well. Some in the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch, you know, you see always this big strawberries attracting people terribly. This is the garden of the lights of the Prado. Okay. And all this is as a consequence of the new economic, cognitive, and cultural paradigm. This is the point, and its crucial link with an urban environment. The urban environment has a monopoly of activities working on knowledge and culture. So, which are the open problems? And I come straight to some conclusions. Open problems. So we didn't work sufficiently on these. Well, first we have to distinguish between cities with capital letters and cities, normal cities, so the big ones. Yeah. Many problems arise. How to measure the quality of advanced services? This is an important point, even because have to do with statistics. And Philippe Aghion, once again, found something very important, that all these statistics in the US, in France, on services, and in particular new services, are completely underrated, underrating, you know, the real dimension of advanced services. So much of the increase in prices, which is linked to quality, is linked to innovation. You know, why Ronaldo gains so much more than a university professor? Because he can, well, he's seen every time that he goes on the field, you know, he's seen by millions and billion of people. So this is the point. And all these are underrated. So my indication is, let's work on GDP at current prices, not the constant prices. Why? Of course, the periphery is still producing, for example, manufactured goods, but the terms of trade, the pricing of this goes down. So in real terms is produced, but in value terms, the money that enters the pocket is much lower. So how can we measure this monopoly element? So this is really an open problem. Just a trial that I made very fastly recently, just to understand where does this rising monopoly power start, at which urban size. So this is, of course, a production function with population over C, which is the minimum urban size for the appearance of this superior urban efficiency. Unfortunately, this cannot be estimated directly, so better to go into this two steps production function. The first is the usual one with capital, labor, and area. And taking the residual and referring it to population, square population, cube of population, we come up with these result showing that since the fourth quartile, we have this real increase. So once again, this monopoly power is not referred to the city, the archetype of cities, but large cities. Okay, we have to work a little bit more. So we have this only very large areas show this positive increasing returns. This is not the strawberry, it's blackberry. Okay, and of course there is much to study on these areas, and of course glory and pleasure for new generation, you know, amusing themselves on. And Bosch, you know, provides this kind of reward. Yeah, and also the knowledge tree, you know, and the big strawberry, anyway. Thank you.